Welcome to another Run It On Air video. In this one I'm going to revisit the Microbrute and have a good look at the waveforms. Now you might have seen the earlier video where I'd already looked at the waveforms, but there was an issue with the signal going through the mixer and it distorted them, so I was getting some false results. That was annoying and really I just wanted to redo it. But I think there's a few other things that I can look at which weren't picked up in the first one anyway, so it's probably worthwhile. Also, a couple of people suggested that I may have been overdriving the levels on the oscillators, and I wanted to investigate that as well. So let's get into it. So I'm going to have a look first of all at the ramp wave. So if we have a look at the scope over here, then you can see that is perfectly good sawtooth in this particular case. That's interesting that here it's the other way around to the way it looks on the display. That's not going to affect anything in terms of the frequencies though. So frequency ranges you expect, I mean, as usual I'm going for that bottom G because it's about 100 Hertz, so you can see quite clearly the harmonics, and you can see that you've got both odd harmonics and even harmonics all the way through, so nothing too unusual there. Now at the moment I have this up to full here. There's nothing really wrong with the waveform that I can see here. That's fine. So that doesn't seem to be affected by any sort of overdriving or anything like that. Let's put it down to halfway. Obviously it's a lot quieter, but I'll turn the master volume up instead and the waveform remains the same. So let's do a similar thing with the square wave. Put it up to full. So we've got that sort of slope thing that you get. If there's any sort of filter in there, so you could have some capacitors blocking DC, and that will have that sort of effect. But if we go to a higher frequency, it should be less pronounced. So let's give that a go. And they do seem a little squarer to me. Has to be said, the signal's going direct into this system, so there's no mixer EQ in the way doing anything that it shouldn't be doing. Right, now this is in that sort of overdriven position, or what we suggestion is that this is being overdriven. Change that around. Just going to swap between the two. I can't really see any difference there. Let's just check the frequencies. So on a square wave you would expect odd harmonics only, and you can see, so we've got harmonic at 100, 300, 500, 700, etc. There's a little bit of a residue at 200, 400 and 600, but you know, nothing's perfect. I think overall that is a square wave and we're getting the harmonics we expect. Now I'm starting it with triangle wave in the central position. You can see the waveform is right here. That is a triangle wave. Harmonically we've got again odd harmonics, which is correct. Now let's do some changes to it. So I'm going to put the master volume down to half, but I'm going to take the triangle up. Let's go to the shape. Now this is interesting. So this is potentially in the overdriven position. And what's interesting with the triangle wave is the shape is different. It's not a perfect triangle anymore. So let's just go back again. I think it's about there. Now you can see that's pretty much a perfect triangle. One noticeable exception is at the top here you can see there's just this flat edge just at the peak, and I remember seeing that before in the last video, so there is something a little bit off about it. It's not absolutely perfect, but I guess that's one of those things that gives it a bit of character. Right, now, all right, so I wanted to have a look at the harmonics on that one then. So if I go there, let's have a look at the frequencies. So notice the relative amplitude between the 300 and the 100. Now let's switch it back to that overdriven state. Now look at that, the 300 has actually gone down. That makes sense, you know, on one hand. When you overdrive the triangle, then it becomes more like a sine wave because it's sort of rounder, so you would expect the harmonics to diminish. But it's the irony is that it's being distorted into a sine wave and therefore losing harmonics. And normally if you distort something you get more harmonics, so that's kind of an unusual thing. For me, that overdriving question is I mean, hopefully that's covered it. I can't think of anything else I might be missing on that one. If anyone's got more comments on that, that's fine. It's not a problem. But I'm not going to do a third one of these. Right. Okay. So now I just want to really look at the characteristics, what you can do. Right. So the basic waveforms are those three waveforms. There's a level control for each one of them, so you can obviously mix them together. So that's something. We've also got the sub-oscillator. So let's go through the waveforms again, but this time let's look at the additional options that each one of them comes with. Triangle wave comes with this Metallizer control, which is actually a waveform folding function. And yeah, as I said in the first video, I would have preferred it if they just called it fold, because then you know what it is. But anyway, I want to have a look at the frequencies on this. It's still very much sort of harmonically related. Sounds a little bit like a filter sweep actually, or a sort of phasing type thing. It certainly gives you a few options there. Obviously gives more harmonics. It's like a harsher form of pulse width modulation, I think, in many ways. Okay, so you can modulate the Metallizer from both the envelope and the LFO, but by default it comes from the envelope. You've actually got two controls which are going to affect the sound here. The first one is just the static Metallizer, how much metallizing is going on, i.e. how much folding is going on. And the second one is the envelope amount. Now, so if I put this up to but you know, the point is that you can change the, yeah, we've not even engaged the filter yet, but we're already getting quite interesting sounds. Okay, so that's the Metallizer. It can be, that function can be modulated by the envelope, but it can also be modulated via the LFO, but you just have to do some patching in this area to do that. I think that covers that section. So let's have a look at the square now. So we've got our pulse width modulation. So it's not an incredibly narrow pulse width by any means. We've got the LFO, put it into pulse width. Sounds almost like a vibrato as well, actually, which feels slightly sick. Anyway, it's a common effect. Obviously you get it on many devices, so I don't think there's anything too remarkable there at this stage. It's a square wave, it's pulse width modulation. You can modulate it both by the envelope and by the LFO, so seems good. Now this one has something called UltraSaw, and essentially it's a multiplier, so it mixes in different phased versions of itself, and as a result you get this sort of out of phase. Okay, yeah, it's kind of a phaser effect, really. It's nice. It's quite subtle. And the speed of it can't be changed by the rate on the LFO. It's not related to that, and it's not related to the rate of the sequencer either. It's just its own thing. It's a set speed and you can't change that. Which is fine in a way, because it means that you don't have to use the LFO to change it. Now you can patch that in. So if I take the LFO and I put it into the saw, I'm not sure the effect, because I think what it's doing is it's changing the amount of that phase effect, which, because it's quite a subtle thing anyway. Yeah, it is very subtle. I mean, I can hear it doing something different, but it's almost like a tremolo on the effect. It's perfectly nice, but not the most dramatic thing that you can do on this synth, that's for certain. While I've said that this is a single oscillator monophonic synth, yeah, it is, but it does make up for that by having this rather nice sub oscillator section. Now what's interesting about it is that it's not just a sub oscillator, it does the octave below whatever pitch you're playing, but it also does the fifth above, and you can have both at the same time. Now I think this is actually quite an interesting shaped waveform. So I've got it on the sub setting here, only going halfway again. What's interesting about this, right, is that essentially it's a square wave. You can see it's a square wave, you know, but it has this bit of a pulse right in the middle of it. It's kind of almost slightly damaged, which gives it a real sort of buzziness about it. But I think that is absolutely brilliant. At this end it's the sub octave, and at the other end you've got a fifth. Now if you go into the middle, then the two start mixed together, and you can see what happens here is that that pulse gets wider. Now I'm going to have a look at it from the frequency point of view actually. So I'm going to put it octave up. So that's quite interesting. Now that one there, I haven't quite gone full way, but if I go there, I'm just getting the fifth. And again, it looks like a square wave, but if I keep going, the sub comes back in. So if you want just the fifth, you need to actually turn it down a little bit. There's a sort of balance point about there, and then mix in your normal oscillator. Now the funny thing about that is that really sounds like a 2 oscillator synth now. For this last section, I'm not going to bother so much about talking about the technicalities of it. Let's actually just see what sort of sounds we can get, because I think that's probably more important. But I'm going to keep the filter up, so I'm not going to touch the filter at all. I'm just going to look at modulation sources, so the LFO and the envelope shaper and the 4 sound sources, and then let's just have a look at some of the combinations that we can get from this. you can mix these together. So let's do this. So got from even spread. So that's 50% sub frequency and 50% the fifth, and then I'm going to mix in one of the other oscillators. That's a lot of square wave. There's no doubt about that. I really love the purity of that fifth, and then adding in the main frequency is just fantastic. I think it's interesting that as soon as you move you start mixing in the sub and the fifth again, it doesn't sound like two notes anymore. It sounds like just one note. And now it sounds like two notes again. That's a really interesting auditory effect. Really, really strange. So I've got the UltraSaw, which has its own sort of frequency phasing thing, which you can see in the frequency diagram. Now let's add some pulse width modulation. So if I go to the LFO, add the pulse width modulation. See how rich we can make this. So we'll turn these down first of all. I mean, seriously, who needs two oscillators when you've got that much going on? It's just very, very rich. Right, it's a few ideas there. There's plenty of other things you can do and mix it all together and see what that sounds like. Let's give that a go, shall we? UltraSaw. Yeah, it's that's a lot of synth. So hopefully that's of use if you're interested in getting a Microbrute. I would highly recommend it. I tend to find I use it far more than I would expect to, considering all of the other synths I've got and considering all the plugins. It's just something that I keep turning to for great analog lead lines and bass. It's just really, really good for that sort of thing. And I think just looking at the oscillator on this particular video, you can see why. It's just got so much going for it. So I would say it's really worth considering. But I'm thinking I'm going to do another video, probably quite a short one, just having a look at the filter, because that's another world as well. And although it's got a relatively small number of controls, it's got a few features which you don't see on every synth. Certainly a lot of the older ones don't have those sort of features. So I'm going to have a look at that as well. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed it, then please consider leaving a like and even subscribing, particularly if you want to see part 2. And check out maybe some of my tracks. There's quite a few on YouTube now. So thanks again. Bye.